The brass key stopped halfway into the cylinder, grinding against metal pins that had been changed while I was at my 24-week ultrasound. I pushed harder, the jagged edge of the key bit into the pad of my thumb. I leaned my weight against the heavy oak door, my 6-month pregnant stomach pressing awkwardly into the wood, and tried to force the lock. It refused to yield. I stepped back, dropping my canvas tote bag onto the concrete porch. The metal clasp clinked loudly in the quiet Ohio suburban afternoon. That was when I noticed the brand name stamped on the shiny brass plate. Schlage. Yesterday morning, it had been a quickset. My brain, trained by 5 years of drafting contracts as a real estate paralegal, registered the hardware change a full second before my mind processed what it actually meant. The door swung inward. My father stood in the entryway. He did not look at my face, and he specifically avoided looking anywhere near my swollen stomach. Instead, he fixed his gaze on a spot somewhere just above my left shoulder. "Your mother and I decided," he said. His voice sounded flat and rehearsed, carrying the stiff cadence of a man reading from a cue card held just out of sight. "We don't want you or your child in this house." I gripped the stiff canvas strap of my tote bag. "Dad, I live here. My things are upstairs. We raised you to be responsible." My father shifted his weight, planting his work boots firmly on the threshold, blocking the doorway with his broad shoulders. "This pregnancy is proof you are not." I looked past him, down the narrow hallway I had walked every day of my 27 years. In the kitchen, at the far end of the hall, my mother stood at the sink. The faucet was running on full blast. Water splashed harshly against porcelain. She had her back to us, wearing her bright yellow rubber gloves, methodically scrubbing a dinner plate that was already clean. The faint smell of lemon dish soap drifted all the way to the front porch. "Mom," I called out. She did not turn around. Her shoulders moved in a steady, rhythmic circle. The water kept running. "Your mother and I agree," my father said, raising his voice slightly to drown out the sound of the sink. "This is final." I watched my mother's back. When my father finished his sentence, she gave one slow, deliberate nod. Just once. A silent director cueing the end of the scene. My father closed the door. The new deadbolt clicked into place with a heavy, metallic thud that seemed to echo across the manicured front lawn. I stood on the porch for exactly 1 minute. I did not knock again. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my bag, walked down the concrete steps to my 10-year-old sedan, and got in. The drive across Columbus took 40 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a bruised shade of white, but my eyes stayed completely dry. The car heater blasted dry air against my face, smelling faintly of old dust and engine oil, while I navigated the late afternoon highway traffic. When I finally reached the small, brick apartment complex where my boyfriend lived, I parked carefully between 2 faded white lines, turned off the ignition, and let go of the wheel. My fingers stayed curled, frozen in that claw-like grip for another 10 seconds before I could force them straight. Marcus opened his door before I even raised my hand to knock. He took one look at my face, slipped the heavy bag from my shoulder, and stepped aside. He did not ask what happened. I walked straight past the tiny kitchen area, went into the bathroom, and shut the door behind me. I turned on the shower faucet, letting the water hit the plastic tub with a deafening roar, and sat down on the cold hexagonal floor tiles. That was when my chest finally caved in. I pulled my knees up as far as my stomach would allow and buried my face in my arms. My throat burned. I kept my mouth pressed hard against my own wrist. The sound of the rushing water covered the noise I made, or at least I desperately hoped it did. 20 minutes later, the water ran cold. I turned off the faucet and opened the bathroom door. The apartment was completely silent. Marcus sat on the very edge of the worn fabric sofa, staring at the blank television screen. On the small wooden table just outside the bathroom, he had left a tall glass of ice water and a steaming, damp washcloth. He did not look up or try to hug me when I took the warm towel and pressed it against my swollen eyes. He just sat there, keeping watch, offering the one thing I needed most: space. Morning came through the thin, crooked blinds of the living room window, casting sharp gray lines across the ceiling. I woke up on Marcus's sofa, my lower back throbbing a dull, persistent ache from the uneven cushions. The smell of strong, cheap coffee drifted from the kitchen counter. My eyelids felt heavy and thick, and my baby kicked sharply against my lower ribs, demanding breakfast. I sat up slowly and pulled my tote bag toward my feet. Paranoia is a professional hazard in my line of work. Working in real estate law meant I never left important documents in a desk drawer where someone else could casually browse through them. I always kept a fireproof lockbox hidden in the trunk of my car, and I had brought it up to the apartment last night without really thinking about why. I hauled the heavy metal box onto the coffee table, punched in the 4-digit code. The latch popped open with a sharp click. Inside were neat manila folders containing my birth certificate, social security card, tax returns, and medical records. I bypassed all the standard files and pulled out a thick, rigid envelope from the very bottom. I remembered the exact afternoon I had signed the papers inside. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school. My father had laid a stack of documents on our kitchen table, tapped the signature lines with the end of his ballpoint pen, and told me it was just some paperwork for tax purposes. I had signed them all without reading a single paragraph, a future paralegal who didn't bother to read her own legally binding documents. The irony tasted like old pennies in the back of my throat. I slid the heavy parchment out of the envelope and smoothed the pages flat on the coffee table. The raised, embossed seal of the county clerk caught the morning light. It was a deed of trust for the residential property located at 4718 Birchwood Lane. I traced my index finger over the text, scanning the dense legal jargon with the trained, mechanical eye of a professional. Grantor, grantee, conveyance, encumbrances. My finger stopped dead at the line designating the sole legal owner of the property. It did not say Ray Caldwell. It did not say Diane Caldwell. The name printed in bold, undeniable black ink was Nora Caldwell. I stared at the letters of my own name for a long, quiet time. The coffee pot in the kitchen hissed and sputtered to a stop. The math in my head, the calculations I had lived by for 27 years, began to shift and reverse. The people who had just changed the locks on the front door did not own the wooden frame it hung in. Legally speaking, the people who had thrown me out onto the porch were nothing more than guests in my house. I ran my thumb over the raised seal of the county clerk again. The rough texture of the embossed paper grounded me. 9 years ago, I sat at the scratched oak kitchen table in my childhood home, fresh out of high school, barely old enough to buy a lottery ticket. My father had tossed a thick manila folder in front of me. He held out a blue ballpoint pen. "Just paperwork, honey," he had said, patting my shoulder with a heavy hand. "For tax purposes." My mother stood by the stove, humming softly while she poured boiling water through a paper coffee filter. The smell of dark roast and vanilla creamer filled the kitchen. Everything had felt completely normal. Nobody explained what the forms actually meant. My father just pointed to the little yellow sticky notes shaped like arrows. "Sign here, sign there." I signed every single page. It was the biggest mistake a future paralegal could possibly make. Now, looking at the date stamped at the top of the deed, the missing pieces snapped together. My father had owned a small landscaping business that collapsed right around my 18th birthday. Creditors were calling the house line 4 times a day. He had needed to hide his biggest asset from the people he owed money to. I picked up my cell phone from the sofa cushion and dialed a number I knew by heart. Ruth Egan practically lived at the county courthouse, but she always answered her personal line. She was a senior partner at a real estate firm downtown, and we had traded favors on tricky title searches for the last 3 years. "Ruth, it is Nora," I said, keeping my voice low so I would not wake Marcus in the kitchen. "I need you to look up a property record in the county database. Right now." "Give me the address," Ruth answered. The sound of a mechanical keyboard started clacking loudly in the background. I recited the street name and the house number. The rapid typing stopped. "Well," Ruth said, her tone shifting from casual professional to intensely curious. "The title is clear. No liens, and you are the sole legal owner on record. Your parents are, legally speaking, just guests in your house." I closed my eyes. Hearing another legal professional confirm the text made the document real. "There is something else," Ruth added, and the silence on the line grew heavy. The transfer history. 9 years ago. The timing is very interesting, Nora. If a homeowner transfers a deed to a family member specifically to shield assets from active creditors, the court calls that fraudulent conveyance. And that carries serious consequences. I thanked her, promised to buy her lunch next week, and ended the call. The stiff parchment on the table looked completely normal. It was not. It was a loaded weapon left sitting in plain sight. That evening, Marcus brought home takeout from the diner down the street. We sat on the floor by the coffee table, eating cold French fries from a greasy paper bag. The smell of fried oil mixed with the scent of old paper. Marcus handed me a napkin and watched me sort my documents into 3 neat, organized stacks. "You know what I never understood about your folks?" Marcus asked. He pointed a fry at the stack of tax records. "They act like you owe them something. But from where I am standing, the math runs the other way." I chewed a cold fry, swallowing without really tasting the salt. The math. My mother always called my monthly rent checks a way of helping the family. Every first of the month, I wrote a check for $800. She called it my fair share for living under their roof, a lesson in adult responsibility. I had never questioned it. I pulled my laptop out of my canvas bag and opened my online banking portal. I highlighted every transfer I had made to my parents over the last 5 years. Then I pulled up the county mortgage records that Ruth had just emailed to my secure account. I aligned the 2 windows side by side on the glowing screen. The numbers lined up perfectly. Too perfectly. The original 30-year mortgage on Birchwood Lane had been paid off completely 3 years ago. Nobody had ever mentioned a mortgage burning party. Nobody had told me the house was free and clear. But the $800 checks kept leaving my account every single month, right on schedule. I had not been paying for groceries or utilities. I had been paying the mortgage on a house I did not know I owned, and when the debt was entirely gone, my mother simply kept the cash flow going. The money had gone straight into her savings. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ground together. A sharp ache shot up the side of my face. Marcus collected the empty takeout boxes, folding the cardboard flaps together. "I ran into Mrs. Gable at the hardware store today," he said, keeping his back to me as he walked toward the kitchen trash can. "She lives 2 houses down from your parents. She asked how you were doing." I stopped scrolling through the spreadsheets. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Marcus replied. He turned around and leaned his weight against the kitchen counter. "Because she told me your parents said you went on an extended vacation to clear your head. Said you packed a bag and just drove off." The first lie. My mother was already building the narrative for the neighborhood. She was constructing the shield, painting herself as the worried mother of a pregnant, unpredictable daughter. I looked at the neat stacks of paper on the table. Tax histories, bank statements, the deed of trust. When you work in a law office, you learn very quickly that arguments do not win cases. Shouting matches do not change legal reality. Documentation wins cases. Paperwork does not care about feelings, and it certainly does not care about family ties or neighborhood gossip. I gathered the documents and tapped the edges against the hard wood of the coffee table to make a perfect, straight block of paper. I slid them back into the thick envelope. "I need to make a call tomorrow," I told Marcus. He walked back into the living room and sat next to me on the sofa. "The lawyer?" he asked quietly. I nodded, staring at the embossed seal of the county clerk barely visible through the envelope window. And then one more. I did not tell him who the second call was for. I just let the silence stretch between us, while the baby shifted heavily against my ribs, and the plan finally took shape in the quiet of the small apartment. I sat across from Ruth Egan the following morning. Her downtown law office smelled heavily of lemon furniture, polish, and stale printer toner. The low, constant hum of the central air conditioning barely masked the sound of city traffic down on the street below. I pushed the heavy manila folder across the polished mahogany desk. Ruth opened the cover and began turning the thick, rigid pages. Her reading glasses slipped down the bridge of her narrow nose while she reviewed the property tax records, the mortgage history, and the copy of the deed. I watched her index finger trace the black ink of the signatures. She did not rush. A good real estate attorney never speeds through a title history. "You were 18 when you signed this," Ruth said, finally looking up from the stack of papers. She took off her glasses and tapped the earpiece against the wooden desk. "And you have never lived anywhere else until this week." "That is correct," I said. My voice held steady in the quiet room. "Well, the law is completely blind to family dynamics," Ruth explained, leaning back in her large leather chair. "You are the sole legal owner of the property. Your parents do not hold a lease agreement. They do not pay you rent. Legally speaking, they are occupants existing entirely on your goodwill." I placed my hands flat on my thighs. The baby shifted, pressing a tiny, sharp heel against my lower ribs. For 27 years, I had walked softly in that house. I had asked permission to paint my bedroom walls. I had paid $800 a month for the privilege of sleeping under my own roof. "I want to list the property for sale," I told her. Ruth stopped tapping her glasses. She studied my face for a long, heavy moment. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" "That is your childhood home." "No," I replied. The word came out smooth and absolute. "It is my asset, and it has been occupied without my consent for 9 years. Ruth nodded slowly. She reached for a fresh yellow legal pad and a silver pen. "Then we start the formal eviction and sale process today. I will send a written notice of your intent to sell via certified mail this afternoon. I will also contact the county assessor office to schedule a full property evaluation. That is the mandatory first step before we can legally put a sign in the front yard." I should have anticipated how fast the shockwave would travel from the downtown post office to the suburbs. I did not. 3 days passed in a strange, organized quiet. Marcus went to his early shifts at the electrical company. I worked remotely from his small kitchen table, drafting commercial lease agreements for my firm while drinking decaffeinated green tea. The envelope from Ruth would have arrived in their mailbox right around noon. On the third evening, my cell phone vibrated violently against the cheap laminate wood of the kitchen table. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let the phone vibrate 3 times, watching it rattle against a coffee mug, before I finally swiped the glass screen to answer. "You cannot sell this house," my father shouted before I could even say hello. The raw panic in his voice cracked through the small receiver, loud enough that Marcus paused his chopping at the kitchen counter. The sharp smell of raw onions and crushed garlic drifted toward me. "We have lived here for 22 years, my father yelled. 22 years in a house that has my name on every single legal document," I answered. I kept my tone perfectly level, adopting the exact, measured voice I used when dealing with difficult opposing counsel over the phone. "I can sell it, and I am selling it. After everything we have done for you," he demanded, his breathing heavy and erratic through the speaker. "We gave you a home, we fed you, we protected you. What you did was forge a financial shield out of your own daughter's name," I told him, pressing the phone tighter against my ear. "I am just deciding what happens to my own property." "Hold on," my father said abruptly. The phone muffled. He had covered the mouthpiece with his heavy hand, but he did not do it well enough. Through the static, I heard a second voice. My mother. She was not screaming. She never screamed. Her voice was a low, urgent hiss in the background, issuing short, clipped instructions. The words were slightly garbled, but the commanding rhythm was unmistakable. She was feeding him lines. When my father came back on the line, his tone had shifted completely. The blind panic was gone, replaced by a rigid, artificial firmness. Someone had just handed him a brand new script. "You are making a terrible mistake, Nora," he said stiffly. I ended the call without saying goodbye. The silence in the small apartment felt heavy and thick. Marcus scraped the chopped onions into a hot frying pan. The cooking oil sizzled loudly, filling the quiet space, but neither of us said a word about the phone call. The real test came 24 hours later. I was folding a stack of clean laundry on the living room sofa when the phone lit up again. This time, it was my mother. I stared at the glowing screen. My chest tightened immediately. That old, familiar weight settled right at the base of my throat, making it hard to swallow. I reached out and answered the call. "Nora, honey," my mother said. Her voice poured through the speaker, soft and thick with manufactured sorrow. It was the exact tone she used when comforting a sick child. "I know your father was harsh yesterday. He is just so upset. But selling the house? That is our home. Your home." I gripped the edge of a folded cotton towel, the rough terry cloth dug into my palms. "Think about your baby," she continued, her voice dropping to a gentle, pleading whisper that tugged at the center of my chest. "Do you not want your child to have a family? To have grandparents who love them? We can fix this, sweetie. Just stop the paperwork and come home." A strange, suffocating warmth washed over me. This was the voice I had chased my entire life, the approving, gentle mother who wanted me close. My eyes began to sting. The logical, paralegal side of my brain slowed down, clouded by the sudden, desperate hope that maybe she actually meant it. Maybe she just wanted her daughter back. I opened my mouth to speak, the word okay forming right on the edge of my tongue. Marcus walked out of the kitchen. He did not say a word. He did not shake his head or look angry. He just stepped over to the coffee table and set a piece of paper down right next to my knee. It was the photocopy of the deed. My eyes locked onto the black ink. Nora Caldwell. The fog in my head cleared instantly. I looked at the paper, and I remembered the kitchen sink. I remembered her standing there, washing a clean plate, wearing bright yellow rubber gloves. I remembered the single, deliberate nod she gave my father right before he slammed the new deadbolt shut in my face. She was not a peacemaker caught in the crossfire. She was the one aiming the weapon. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My voice returned, cold and perfectly steady. "Mom, I appreciate the call," I said, "but the property listing goes live next week." The shift happened in a fraction of a second. The sweet, weeping mother vanished completely from the line. "You will regret this," she stated. Her voice was pure ice, sharp and absolute. The temperature of the conversation dropped to freezing. "Family does not do this to family. Family does not change the locks on their pregnant daughter either," I replied. I pressed the red button on the screen and tossed the phone onto the cushion. The following afternoon, Ruth called my personal line again. I sat at the small table with my yellow notebook open. "I have been digging into the county court archives," Ruth said. The sound of shuffling paper echoed through the speaker. "When you file a property transfer, the county retains the exact date and timestamps. I pulled your father's old business records. 9 years ago, his landscaping company was sued by 2 major suppliers for unpaid invoices. The lawsuit was officially filed on October 12th. I picked up my pen. "And what date did he transfer the house into my name?" "October 14th, Ruth said. "Exactly 48 hours later. It is a textbook case of fraudulent conveyance. He moved his primary asset to shield it from a pending judgment. If his old creditors or the state tax board ever found out about this specific timeline, he could face severe legal and financial penalties." I wrote the dates down in my notebook. October 12th, October 14th. The numbers stared back at me, proving everything I already knew. I did not tell Ruth to report it. I did not make any sudden moves. I just drew a neat, square box around the dates and added the information to the mental case file I was slowly building. 3 days later, the county assessor office confirmed the inspection date, which meant within 3 weeks, a letter would arrive at 4718 Birchwood Lane, and when my father opened it, everything he thought he controlled was about to collapse. But here is the part I did not see coming. It was not my father's reaction that shattered me. It was my mother's. The next 2 weeks passed in a kind of organized quiet. The county assessor office operates on a very strict, predictable schedule, and Ruth had explained exactly how the timeline would unfold. She told me it would take 14 days for the Postal Service to process and deliver the official notice of assessment. I knew exactly what the envelope would look like. It would be thick, white, and stamped with the official black seal of the county clerk. Most importantly, it would be explicitly addressed to the legal property owner, Nora Caldwell. but it would be delivered directly to the brass mailbox at the end of the driveway on Birchwood Lane, right where my parents were currently living. I knew the letter was coming. I did not call them to explain. I did not send a warning message. I simply waited in the small apartment and let the municipal government do its job. The inevitable fallout arrived on a Tuesday evening. Marcus and I had just finished washing the dinner plates when a heavy, frantic pounding shook the front door. It was not a polite knock. The cheap wooden frame actually rattled against the hinges. Marcus dried his hands on a dish towel, gave me a sharp look, and walked over to turn the deadbolt. My father did not wait to be invited inside. He pushed past Marcus, stepping right into the center of the narrow living room. His face was entirely devoid of color, pale and slick with a thin layer of sweat despite the cool autumn air outside. His jacket was zipped up unevenly. In his right hand, his fingers gripped a crumpled white envelope so tightly that the paper was beginning to tear at the edges. He threw the crushed letter onto the coffee table. It landed right next to my legal notepad. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking on the final syllable. "What did you do?" I did not stand up. I stayed seated on the sofa, resting my hands comfortably over my stomach. "I listed my property for sale," I answered, keeping my tone perfectly level and professional. "The county is performing a standard property assessment." That is exactly how the real estate process works. My father completely lost his composure. He started pacing the short distance between the television and the window, waving his arms in erratic, jagged motions. He shouted about respect, about family loyalty, and about the neighborhood finding out. He slammed his heavy hand down on the edge of the kitchen counter. Marcus stepped forward, his shoulders tensing, placing himself firmly between my father and the sofa. I reached out and touched Marcus on the wrist. I gave him a small, silent shake of my head. I needed to handle this myself. I looked directly at the man who had locked me out of my childhood home. 5 years of working in a law firm had taught me exactly how to corner a hostile witness. "Whose idea was it to put the house in my name, Dad?" I asked. The question stopped his pacing immediately. He stared at me, his chest heaving heavily under his jacket. "It was a family decision," he stammered, his eyes darting toward the front door. "We needed to protect the family. You needed to protect your personal assets from your commercial creditors," I corrected him. I let the legal terminology hang in the quiet room, heavy and undeniable. The court calls that fraudulent conveyance. Complete panic washed over his face. The color drained from his cheeks all over again. He knew I understood the law, and he suddenly realized he was standing on incredibly thin ice. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a stuttering, breathy sound came out. I leaned forward slightly. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every single word was sharp enough to cut bone. And whose idea was it to kick me out? My father clamped his mouth shut. He stared at the carpet. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. "Because you have never made a single major decision in that house without someone telling you exactly what to do," I pushed, turning the metaphorical screw just one fraction tighter. The pressure finally broke him. It was not courage that forced the truth out of his mouth. It was pure, unadulterated fear for his own survival. "It was your mother," he blurted out. The words tumbled over each other in a desperate, ugly rush. "She said if you stayed in the house with that baby, you would eventually want the property for real. She said you worked in a law office and you would eventually find out about the transfer. She told me we had to cut you off completely before you figured it out." The air left the apartment. Marcus turned his head and looked at me, but I did not meet his gaze. I sat perfectly still for several long seconds. My brain began aggressively sorting through 2 decades of memories, pulling up every quiet moment and reassigning the roles. My mother standing at the kitchen sink, washing a perfectly clean plate, my mother giving that one, single nod while my father delivered the crushing news. My mother calling my cell phone, her voice dripping with sweet, manufactured sorrow, begging me to come home. It was never my father, and I agree. It was always just her. I looked back at my father. "So she used you to hide assets from your creditors," I said, my voice dropping to a hollow, empty whisper. Then she used you to hide me from the truth. And you let her do it, every single time." He had nothing left to say. His shoulders slumped, and he suddenly looked like a very old, very tired man. I did not offer him any comfort. I simply delivered the final verdict. "The sale process will continue," I informed him. "There is no room for negotiation. And when the transaction is completely finalized, the property records will be permanently updated. The transfer history from 9 years ago will become a public record, easier to access than ever before. If your old creditors happen to look." I let the sentence trail off. I did not threaten him. I merely presented the inevitable consequences of his own actions. "I am not going to report the fraudulent transfer to the authorities," I told him quietly. "I do not need to do that, but when the county updates their files, anyone who looks will see exactly what happened 9 years ago. That is not my doing. That is just math." My father turned around and walked toward the front door. He did not say a single word of apology. He did not look back. He just pulled the door open and stepped out into the dark hallway, leaving the crumpled envelope sitting on the table. For 27 years, I thought my mother was the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the one who just went along with whatever my father said. I was wrong. She was never quiet. She was composing. Marcus locked the door behind my father. He did not ask if I was okay. He just sat next to me on the couch and waited. And after a while, I said something I had not planned on saying. I told him I was going to be a mother. I whispered the words into the quiet space of the living room, realizing it was the only truth that mattered anymore. 2 weeks later, the county appraiser finished his walkthrough, and a bright blue and white real estate sign was pounded firmly into the front lawn of Birchwood Lane. My cell phone rang on a Tuesday morning. The caller identification displayed my mother's number. I answered it while sitting at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise from my mug of decaffeinated tea. "Nora," my mother said. The sweet, weeping voice was entirely gone. The icy, commanding tone had vanished, too. What remained was a thin, ragged sound, pure desperation. "If you sell this house, your father could face criminal charges. His old creditors are going to see the public records. You would really do that to your own father?" I listened to the uneven catch in her breathing. She was using the only weapon she had left. She was trying to use my lingering love for my father as a shield. It was a calculating move, but the mathematics of our family had already permanently changed. "You put this house in my name to protect Dad from his creditors," I told her, my voice perfectly calm, anchored by the truth. "You kicked me out onto the porch to protect yourself from the truth. And now you are asking me to protect both of you." I took a slow breath, feeling the baby kick against my ribs. That is a whole lot of protection for people who would not even protect their own grandchild. I pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the table. She did not call back. The fallout in the neighborhood was swift and absolute. Marcus ran into Mrs. Gable at the grocery store 3 days later. She told him my mother had been walking up and down the sidewalks, stopping anyone who would listen, telling them her ungrateful daughter had turned on the family. But nobody was buying the story anymore. They had all seen the large wooden sign planted right next to the brass mailbox. The bold lettering at the top did not say Caldwell Family Estate. It proudly displayed the legal truth: Nora Caldwell, owner. My parents were forced to pack their cardboard boxes in broad daylight, loading a rented moving truck while the entire street watched the consequences of their 9-year lie finally unfold. My father now had to retain a defense attorney, waiting to see if the state tax board would reopen his old corporate files. My mother lost the one thing she valued above all else: total control. Life in our small apartment stayed quiet. We were not wealthy, and the laminate floors still creaked when it rained, but the air felt remarkably clean. I returned to my desk at the law firm a few weeks later. I was a much better paralegal than before. I no longer just scanned the signature lines or verified the dates. I read the heavy stories hiding behind the black ink. When the property sale finally closed, a massive wire transfer hit my bank account. I did not spend a single cent on myself. I drafted a dense, ironclad legal document and placed the vast majority of the funds into a locked trust for my child. It was the very first honest financial document ever created in the Caldwell family. On a cool Sunday afternoon, I stood in the small second bedroom, folding tiny yellow cotton clothes. Marcus was kneeling on the carpet, tightening the wooden bolts on a new crib. I looked over at the small stack of papers resting on the dresser. The copy of the old deed, the finalized sale documents, the thick trust fund portfolio. I remembered what Marcus had said while we ate cold French fries on the floor. The math runs the other way. I finally understood exactly what he meant. I never owed them anything. They were the ones who owed me. They owed me the truth. They owed me basic respect. They owed me the right to know who I actually was inside the house that legally bore my name. I picked up a pen and a small square of paper. I wrote a single sentence, walked into the kitchen, and pressed it onto the center of the refrigerator door, right where my mother used to tape my endless lists of weekend chores. This home belongs to the people in it. The words were simple, but they were finally enough. My parents turned me into a piece of paperwork. They made me a name on a dotted line, a casual signature that meant absolutely nothing to them and everything to a court of law. But here is the profound thing about paperwork. It does not care who filled it out. It does not care about manipulation or tears. It only cares whose name is printed on the page. And the name on that deed was mine. If someone ever hands you a thick stack of documents and tells you to just sign it and not worry about it, you should worry about it. Read every single line, because one day, that flimsy piece of paper might be the only thing standing between you and the people who were supposed to love you. And if you are the kind of person who always reads the fine print, maybe that is not paranoia. Maybe that is just the part of you that already knew.
Trong người là mất 9 triệu tiền vào nào.